Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm Brandon Vaught, the host and the content director here at Word on Fire, and I'm joined with our illustrious guest, the centerpiece of Word on Fire, the founder of Word on Fire, Bishop Robert Barron. Bishop Barron, good to be with you.
Brandon, how's it going?
It's going well. Now listen, I want to talk about a couple of events, one you just attended, one you're about to attend, and they're on opposite sides of the country. So the one you just attended was in Tahoma, Washington. It was the Cornerstone Catholic Conference. Tell us how that went.
It was good. It was a gathering of about 1,000 or 1,500 people maybe from all over the state of Washington. It was a conference sponsored by the bishops of Washington. All great guys. I was invited by Archbishop Sarton, whom I've known for a long time, and I think one of the really great churchmen in our country today. And the express purpose of this conference was to think together the more social justice side of the church's commitment and the pro-life side. Because as you know, maybe since the time of the council, those two have kind of fallen apart from each other, unhappily. One identified more with the left, one with the right. And it's produced certain tensions in the life of the church. So the idea of this conference was to bring everyone together and try to make a case. I talked about Reinhold Hillenbrand, one of my great heroes, who I think embodied, maybe as well as anybody in the 20th century, the coming together of these two things. Because Hillenbrand, as you know, was a famous advocate of the church's social justice mission. However, this is less well known. He was also head of the CFM, or the Christian Family Movement, which had to do with issues of marriage and sexuality and children and family, right? Furthermore, after Vatican II, and after the Birth Control Commission, had in its majority report recommended a change in the teaching on birth control, Pope Paul VI, now almost exactly 50 years ago, it'll be this summer, issued Humanae Vitae, which reaffirmed traditional teaching. Well, here's what I talked about, and I find very interesting, that Hillenbrand, who was the great advocate of social justice, Dorothy Day and the whole bit, affirmed Paul VI, and it put him very much on the defensive and very much in a minority position. Many of his former disciples and colleagues abandoned him. But I was arguing that I thought Hillenbrand was a prophetic figure because he was refusing to allow to fall apart the social justice and the life side of this question. Anyway, that was my talk. I developed it in a number of ways.
Yeah, I remember a few episodes back, we kind of walked through the talk you gave and highlighted your emphasis that the Mass is the great uniting moment for these two groups, the pro-life group and the social justice group. How was your talk received? What was your sense?
Oh, I think, well, and you're right. What I did is I told the Hillenbrand story somewhat briefly, but then I said, okay, so what would be the Hillenbrand strategy? And it would be to look at the liturgy. The liturgy is what brings these two things together. So then I walked through the Mass and I kept asking the question, okay, if this is true, whether we're talking about the sign of the cross or the Kyrie or the Gloria or the readings from Scripture or the offertory, the sacrificial attitude, if all this is true, then what should your social, economic, and political commitments look like? What should your commitments to marriage, family, and children look like if this is true? And I left them as kind of rhetorical questions. But I think people got what I was driving at.
Okay, in just a few more days, you are going to have a big event out there in California. We're going to be filming a new 6-part film and study program based around the Mass, and we'll have a lot more to say about that later, so I don't want to spend time here covering that. But then on Monday, which will actually be the day that this episode releases, Monday, October 30th, you'll be in New York for the esteemed Erasmus Lecture, which is hosted by First Things. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a lecture that is kind of their signature lecture every October. And I've been reading it for years. All the people that have given the Erasmus Lecture, and then it's always published afterwards in First Things. So it was maybe a year and a half ago, they reached out to me and invited me to do it. And that's one of those invitations that, the minute you get it, you're eager to say yes. So worked on that talk actually several months ago now, and I'm now doing some polishing of it. But I'm going to deliver that on Monday. And then the following day, there's this kind of symposium. They get about 30 scholars together to dissect the talk or to question you about it or to follow up on it. So that'll be on Tuesday, I think, morning and afternoon. So it'll be a very interesting little workout, I think, in New York City.
I'll be there with you, and we're hoping to capture a lot of content. So if you want to follow along, I'm hoping to do some live videos. We'll record some podcast episodes there. Be sure to follow Bishop Barron on Instagram and Facebook. Bishop, Tuesday is going to be, what's traditionally remembered to be the anniversary of Luther nailing his 95 thesis on the door of the Wittenberg Church 500 years ago. I think we should print out your Erasmus lecture and hammer it on the doors of St. Patrick's or something like that. What do you think?
I don't think that would go over very well with Cardinal Dolan or anybody else. But yeah, it's ironic that I'll be there and that the book with John Allen is coming out that very day, the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. Not that that was planned, believe me.
Yeah, so an exciting week here at Word on Fire and all the good stuff you're doing. Okay, well, that's a good segue here to the topic, which is really pulled from your Erasmus lecture. Your Erasmus lecture is on evangelizing the nones, the Nones. And I thought we'd spend this episode talking about how to reach the nones, people with no religious identification. Now, before we talk about how to reach them, I think it's important first to understand them as a group. And you recently finished a book called by Jean Twenge, who I think is a
is that their name, by the way? I've never heard the name pronounced.
Yeah, so it's spelled Twenge. And I got to admit, I went on YouTube and tried to find some other interviews with her to figure out how to pronounce it. But
I was saying twenge, but I have no idea really how she says it.
Yeah, they all say Twenge, so I assume that's it. But the book is called iGen, so kind of like iPhone, iPad, iGen. And here's the long subtitle: Why Today's Super Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood, and what that means for the rest of us. So this book covers people who were born roughly in the mid-90s and later. So this would kind of be the generation after mine, after the millennials. So she calls them the iGen generation. What were your initial impressions of the book, Bishop?
Yeah, I liked it a lot. I forget how I heard about it. Maybe it was on the web, or maybe you sent it to me. I forget. But I liked it right away. It's very well argued. It's articulate. She's a psychologist and sort of kind of a sociologist, by background. And so there's a lot of numbers and surveys and all this. But I found it very thoroughgoing and very convincing as she looks at this rising generation from a number of standpoints. And it was as I say, both fascinating and more than a little bit depressing, because a number of things she points out that I think are disturbing, but especially what she says about religion among the iGen. But I really would recommend it to anyone dealing with young people and young adults today, because this is the coming generation, and the way they've been shaped is going to have a big impact on the wider world.
By most of the metrics that she cites, this iGen generation seems to be either among or the least religious generation in U.S. history. And in the book, she talks about a few specific reasons why young people seem to be disconnecting from religion. And I wanted to run through them each with you. So first of all is this preoccupation with individual choice. Talk about that.
Yeah, I think that this generation that was brought up, and yours too to a degree, I think the millennials, with this whole range of choices, from everything from what you wear to how you wash your hair to your lifestyle. That you're presented with a whole range of choices, and your beauty and integrity and goodness is affirmed all the time. So in other words, it's following your instincts. That's what matters. Being the person that you think you are, that's what matters. So you've got that coupled with this wide range of choices. Well, that's very much at odds with the proposal that this is the way. So when Jesus says, "Follow me," I am the way, the truth, and the life. When you're proposing not just a private truth for you, but the truth for human flourishing. I said in my little article on the book that that famous billboard I saw, now it's well over a year ago out here in California, "My life, my death, my choice," is a great model for the iGen and maybe for the millennials too. It's up to me. It's my choice. It all belongs to me. How that's utterly at odds with St. Paul's: "Whether I live or whether I die, I am the Lord's." You couldn't get more directly opposed. So that's a major block to anyone that would say, "Hey, I've got the truth. I've got the best way for you to live. The instinct, certainly of the iGeners, is, well, A, who are you to tell me what to do? And B, how the heck would you know what's the one way, So keeping all the options open, all the range of choice in place is repugnant to a strongly evangelical claim.
So what do you do to make headway in that sort of culture?
Well, my instinct, Brandon, as you know, because we've talked about it a lot, is I've argued that in any area of life that you take seriously, you don't accept this kind of subjectivizing relativism. In other words, if you're really serious about learning a musical instrument, you're not going to say things like, oh, play any way you want, or, oh, there's a whole range of possibilities. No, you're going to be very locked onto the right way to do it. Or like just yesterday, I was working with my Spanish tutor, and we're going over pronouns. And anyone that's studied foreign languages, I always find that's the hardest thing. I gave it to her. I gave them to you, because the other languages tend to reverse what English does, right? So we're working away at it, and there's not like a range of options here. There's the right way to say it. And I'm intensely interested in the right way to say it, because I don't want to sound like an idiot when I get up to speak Spanish. She's not going to say to me, oh, you're a good person. You've chosen another way to express the pronouns, the indirect object pronouns. No, there's the right way to do it. And there's a whole slew of wrong ways to do it. I've explored most of them, right? So if you're taking it seriously, learning an instrument, learning a foreign language, learning how to play baseball, learning how to play golf, you're not going to accept this, who cares, anything goesism. So the problem here is that people don't take religion seriously. And so they easily fall into this relativism.
A second major reason that Jean Twenge cites in her book iGen as to why young people are disconnecting from religion is that belief in religion and science seem to many young people to be incompatible. And there's a couple quotes in the book. One young person that Twenge interviews says, religion, at least to people my age, seems like it's something of the past. It seems like something that isn't modern. And another person says, I knew from church that I couldn't believe in both science and God, so that was it. I didn't believe in God anymore. Yeah. Is this something you encounter pretty often, Bishop?
All the time. And I was amazed, not really amazed, I was confirmed, because you see it now in poll after poll and survey after survey, that this is often reason number one. The other day, I was at a deanery meeting, that was here in Santa Barbara, and we were talking about this issue, and one of the priests said, well, it's the sex abuse scandals, right? That's what. And I said, no, it's not. It hasn't helped us one little bit, don't get me wrong. But if you look at the surveys, especially these really young kids, for whom that's probably now kind of like history, Again, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not belittling it for a second. But objectively, it doesn't come up on these surveys as a major reason why young people are leaving. Far more prevalent is this one, is science and religion. And because, as I've said, given the scientific approach of people today, that the scientific way of knowing is the only legitimate way to know. Well, then if you're outside of the sciences, as religion is, then it's obviously just nonsense, or it's old-fashioned, or it's primitive science or something, right? That's a major obstacle for a lot of, especially young people today. And so, there's a lot we could say about it, but I've been on that hobby horse for a long time, that we got to talk a lot about science. She makes an observation in her book that I thought was very interesting, that the number of kids who have a problem with this, and secondly, the number who are interested in pursuing a career in the sciences. And then she says, how often are preachers preaching about a science-related topic? And the answer implied is practically never. Well, that's not good. That's where a lot of our young people are at and what's bugging them. So we should talk a lot about religion and science and how they are deeply compatible one with the other.
That's an interesting observation, because I found seeing things from both a Protestant perspective and then converting to Catholicism and seeing it in the Catholic Church, I found that far more Protestant churches imply this explicit contradiction between faith and science. I've never seen that explicitly articulated in the Catholic Church. However, even in the Catholic Church, the silence that you just mentioned, that science isn't really talked about, it's not paraded around, there's almost a quiet suspicion about it. That implication still speaks volumes to young people. How come we're never talking about it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because as that quotation indicated, that probably was more of a fundamentalist, church that you can't. There's the scientific view of the world, there's the biblical view of the world, and you can't have them both. Well, the kid then says, well, then okay, I choose science because that seems far more persuasive. But see, the problem is you shouldn't set it up that way, as though these are two, alternative worldviews on the same plane. You're comparing apples and oranges here is the problem. But yeah, I agree with you. I think our own silence on it has not been good. Not only should we talk about the great Catholic scientists, but we should talk about how this is a non-problem. That's my usual approach to it. Is look, everybody, it's a non-problem. Go all the way with science. Don't think for a second that I'm going to stand athwart your scientific curiosity. Go all the way. You won't begin to undermine belief, authentic belief in God.
Okay, let's look at a third and final reason that Twenge gives for why young people are disconnecting religion. This one I don't think will be surprising to many people. She said, according to lots and lots of studies, what she describes as anti-gay attitudes, which are supposedly endemic to biblical Christianity. She quotes one young person who says, "I'm questioning the existence of God. I stopped going to church because I'm gay and was part of a gay-bashing religion." One of the surveys she cites states the statistical truth pretty bluntly. It says that 64% of 18 to 24-year-olds believe that Christianity is anti-gay, and 58% of those iGeners thought that the Christian religion is hypocritical. Is this something that you come up against pretty often? I know the science stuff is prominent, but do you pick up on this sense too?
I do indeed. And of course, there's so much we could say about it. It's a very complicated thing. Here's the first observation. The Catholic Church, I think, has been pretty admirably clear in its formal teaching, although we probably haven't propagated it very well, to make this very, very sharp distinction between the person and the act, that someone with a same-sex attraction should be treated with love and compassion and respect. They should never be the object of derision or bullying, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The church has been very clear on that score, So that we're anti-gay is simply false at the level of our teaching. It's simply false.
If you mean anti-gay person.
Yeah, if you mean that we're advocating violence toward gay people or that we want to ostracize gay people. The church is against the explicit acting out in a genital way of that same-sex attraction. So I'm purposely there kind of hyper-defining my terms just so that we know it's a particular type of behavior the church says is inimical. It militates against human flourishing. And by the way, we say that about all kinds of things because indeed there are all kinds of activities that all of us sinners engage in that are repugnant to full human flourishing. And so the church speaks out against them. It doesn't mean it's hateful, judgmental, and just that word hate to me is become such a problematic word. If by hate you mean the opposite of love, then the church never advocates hating anybody. I mean, you love everybody. You love your enemies. You love those who are trying to kill you, as in Jesus' case. So, of course, church isn't advocating hatred. But when it says certain forms of behavior are inimical to full human flourishing, it's saying that precisely as an act of love, right? If by love you mean willing the good of the other. And to say this is the right way to live, that's an act of love. Or to say, the path you're on is a dangerous path or a destructive path, that's an act of love. So it's that distinction that has to be made clearly. Now, I'm a Newman person. I don't think these things they're rarely decided with one kind of knockdown argument. Does the church have to engage maybe in a long period of real hospitality toward people with same-sex attraction, an outreach to them in a spirit of love? Yeah. I mean, maybe there has been too much just, putting up walls and negativity. But I don't want that then to bleed into a sort of indifferentism when it comes to moral activity, So I'm stating it kind of broadly here, but that's what the church, I think, is about on this issue. And it means we're not guilty of the charge of gay bashing or hating gay people. Certainly not. I'd say on the contrary.
One thing I've noticed is that over the last 20 or 30 years, as LGBT issues have risen in prominence and it's become way more acceptable to quote unquote come out of the closet, that the millennial and iGen generations, of which I'm a part, are probably the first generation where virtually everybody in this generation knows at least somebody who is openly gay, and usually a close friend or a family member. And so this tends to be a block to faith because we see this false dichotomy again. Either I can be a Christian or I can love this friend or family member that I have. And of course, the friend or family member's always going to win out. So, I mean, you gave a couple of maybe institutional pathways forward, but what would you say to an iGen sitting in front of you who has this sense that Catholicism or Christianity is anti-gay?
Well, again, articulating at the level of ideas that that's not the case. So clarifying the teaching, but also, I mean, encouraging that person in the best of their instincts. That if it's a friend or a family member who has same-sex attraction and they love them and are willing what's best for them and they want them included and all of that, great, terrific, off you go. And the church should be behind that, you know. But it's always, you know, Cardinal George that kind of haunts me at these moments. All are welcome, on Christ's terms, not your own. And that's a really helpful distinction. So that's, in other words, he liked that sentiment. All are welcome in the church. Come on, everyone is welcome. But you're not welcome simply on your terms. Don't tell me now I have to change anything. Don't tell me that there's anything wrong with me. I'm welcome. No, you're welcome on Christ's terms. And now what's Christ asking of you? And the church has that obligation. You know, and look at this thing, Brandon, you know this, go back over our history. The issue now maybe is the gay issue, but there's all kinds of issues in the history of the church where we've been accused of, you know, being negative and judgmental and all this. Well, because we're calling people to the form of Christ. You know, whether it's John Chrysostom saying, you've got two shirts in your closet, one belongs to you and one belongs to the man with no shirt. Man, that's a pretty strong statement. Hyper-liberal in our terms, hyper-liberal thing to say. What do you mean? You're against capitalism? You're against private property? Well, I don't know, man. I don't know what it's saying precisely, but I think that's right, you know. So my point there is that the church has always been about the business of calling people to difficult conversion. It's calling me to that every day. I sit before the Lord in my holy hour, and I'm always acutely aware of my need for conversion, right? My need to change. So I put it too in that broader context.
Now, those are some good insights onto who this iGeneration is and why they're disconnecting religion. In many ways, your talk here at the Erasmus Lecture is an answer to the question, okay, well, what do we do then? How do we reach them? And you offer 5 pathways, and none of these will be surprising to people who know you or who have listened to this show. I'm going to tick through them real fast. First, commence with beauty. Second, stop dumbing down the faith. Third, tell the great story of Israel. Fourth, emphasize the God of the burning bush. And then fifth, engage in radical witness. Now, we've covered those first 4, I think, a whole episode on each of those at least. But talk to me a little bit about this last one, engage in radical witness. What do you mean by that?
I mean, if you look at the true, the good, and the beautiful, right? Begin with beauty is obviously the beautiful. The true, so don't dumb it down, and then tell the great story. So the third transcendental of the good has always had a compelling power. Namely, if people see how lives are changed by Christ, how these Christians love one another. So go right back to the beginning. That's what drew them in many cases, not arguments, though from the beginning we've been making arguments, don't get me wrong. But what drew a lot of people to the church was how these Christians love one another, what a radical way they're living. And I've used the example many times of Benedict at the beginning of the Western monastic period, Francis and Dominic, Anthony of the Desert, Ignatius of Loyola. At key moments of the church's life, certain great saints emerge who, by the very radicality of their living the Christian life, have a compelling and attractive power. often, again, the irony that these people emerge at moments of crisis when the church is shaking, when the foundations are shaking. That's when these great figures have tended to emerge, and they draw it back to itself. I think we're in such a time. I wouldn't have seen it 30 some years ago when I was ordained a priest. It was still pretty stable church in America, and priesthood was deeply respected and all this. And we didn't have the phenomenon of the nuns yet in the mid 1980s. Who would have seen the extraordinary crises we've been through? Okay. It's not mine to choose the time I'm given, right? As Gandalf said, but it's mine to respond to what's in front of me. So, all right, this is maybe a time for people to rise up and live the Christian thing radically. So I do think that's a call of our time, very especially.
One final question here. We get emails almost every day from distraught parents whose sons and daughters have left the church, and many of them becoming nuns. They wouldn't identify with any religion anymore. And one struggle they have is that these young people just seem to be completely ambivalent about religious matters, or they would maybe describe them as spiritually indifferent. It's just not even on their radar. What would you recommend for a young person like that who's not even really interested in all these questions we've been discussing?
Well, again, it depends on the person. I'm again Newman man. You have to look at it individually, and there's not like one size fits all. For some people, it's a book. Like people like you and me who are more, intellectually oriented, and so to hand a kid a book like Mere Christianity, or in my case, when I was a young man, I was handed a version of Thomas Aquinas, and Thomas Merton had a big door-opening influence on me. Another one, though, that people often recommend, and I think it's right, is to get kids involved in the social ministry of a church. Get them involved in the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. Serve the poor in all the forms that poverty takes. It's material poverty, but also psychological, spiritual poverty, intellectual poverty. Get people in concrete acts of service, I think, can have a soul-changing effect. The other one, too, go back to our theologians of the 20th century who talked about limit experiences. It's often when people are up against a limit, and that means failure, that means sickness, it can mean the death of a friend, it can mean my own brush with mortality. Those can often be moments of opening to the spiritual. When I'm brought to the edge of my ordinary experience and I realize, boy, that's not it. That's not all there is to it. Those can be moments, I don't mean this aggressively, but for the church to kind of pounce and to be present there when people are at limit moments. So those are all strategies I would recommend.
And you recommended even pursuing this sort of spiritual change at the other end of the spectrum when somebody reaches a particularly high moment and they realize that's it. What's beyond that?
That's right. That's also a limit experience, a peak experience. I've come to the peak of something, whether it's sensual pleasure, whether it's intellectual attainment, whether it's a friendship. At peak moments, that's the C.S. Lewis insight. It's precisely then that I have that nagging sense of, okay, great, I got it, what I've always wanted, and I'm still not satisfied. That's a key moment in life. So the best moments and the worst moments can be those limit experiences that open us up.
Well, it's time now for a question from one of our great listeners. Listen, we love hearing from you guys. So anytime you can, anytime a question pops in your mind that you'd like to ask Bishop Barron, just visit askbishopbarron.com, record your question. We pick out one for every show, and some shows we take multiple questions. Today's question comes from Michael, who's wondering what makes great music great. So here's Michael's question.
Hi, Bishop Barron. This is Mike, and I'm calling from Saskatoon. My question is about music. I know you're a fan of Bob Dylan, as am I, and I want to know what you think makes great music great. Is it just the lyrics and the storytelling? Is it also the melody and the harmony and are we supposed to understand great music in a more classical sense? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that searching question. I'm no music theorist. I play the guitar at a very primitive level, and I can blow the harmonica at a very primitive level. So that's my musical attainment. I'm no expert. I've never studied musical theory, that sort of thing. I've always loved, find them on YouTube, those great little courses that Leonard Bernstein gave for young people. But man, they're sophisticated. If you want to get that sort of introduction to the music theory behind the great composers, I'd recommend him. But I'd say a few things as kind of a philosopher. Go back to Aquinas: integritas, consonantia, claritas, the three elements that make up the beautiful: wholeness, harmony, and radiance. And you can apply that very much to music. A piece of music that holds together as one. It has integritas. It's not like all over the place. It has now, in the literal sense with music, consonantia, right? The harmonic relationship among the parts. Now, music theorists will tell you all about harmonies and how they get constructed and why they work and so on. Claritas is that luminosity that comes from the revelation of the form, and that applies very much to music. And see, I would say this, I've been using kind of highfalutin language there, but what's true of Beethoven's Seventh Symphony is also true of A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, the first Bob Dylan song I ever heard. And it couldn't be simpler musically. It's got 3 chords, and it's got a simple but kind of haunting melody. But it's got, I would argue, integritas, consonantia, claritas, both at the musical level and the lyrical level. You're suggesting, I think, rightly, that when those come together, and that's a good example, that song, it's extremely powerful. Music can move us in a way that hardly anything else does. I've always had that experience with rock and roll. And I'm going to scandalize my people, my parents' generation, but rock and roll to me always has had that kind of spiritual power, that elemental quality. I've been moved by rock and roll as much as I've been moved by Beethoven. And that's not to say they're at the same level of complexity, of course not. But to me, it has this sort of revelatory power. And I think people like Springsteen and U2 and REM and Bob Dylan and people like that understand that. Van Morrison really gets it too. Leonard Cohen. There's all kinds of people that get how the musical power coheres very well with a breakthrough to the transcendent. So that's a somewhat rambling answer to your cool question.
Well, thanks for the great question, Mike. One more thing here before we wrap up. As we're nearing Advent, that great season of anticipation before Christmas, we are giving out free Advent booklets. That's right, free. We're going to mail you a booklet in the mail that contains reflections from Bishop Barron on each gospel reading throughout the season of Advent. So it's the perfect way to start each day by reading the gospel and then reading this little gospel reflection. So to get your free book, just go to wordonfireshow.com/Advent. The book is free. You just cover the shipping and handling, but we'd love to mail you one today. So go to wordonfireshow.com/Advent. Well, thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week on the Word on Fire Show.